All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Haley Trefen, and I'm a public library consultant here at the Indiana State Library. I'd like to welcome you to the 2021 budget workshop. If your screen name on here isn't currently set to your actual name, please edit that to help us out when we're issuing LEUs. To do that, you'll just hover over your picture name, click on the three dots, and then click on rename. If you have a question during the workshop, please type that in the chat instead of raising your hand. And also, please make sure when you type in the chat that you send it to all panelists and attendees instead of just panelists, since you're probably not the only one with that question. This morning, we are going to start off with Fred Van Dorp, the Budget Division Director for the Department of Local Government Finance. Fred, it is all yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fred Van Dorp. I'm the Budget Division Director for the Department of Local Government Finance, and I've got the morning presentation. I'm glad to be back. I have got a 4-hour presentation scheduled. Well, not exactly 4 hours, but you'll see what I mean as we start to work through it. We are about 18 months into presenting as much digitally as we have in person, or presenting more virtually than we do in person. And I can tell you that over the last 18 months, it feels like electronic presentations seem to run long. Our webinars are generally scheduled for an hour, but consistently coming in at that 65 to 70 minute mark, which has the unfortunate side effect of not leaving a lot of time for a live action question and answer session. I'm hoping to fix that today. In my head, I'm hoping to go between 60 and 90 minutes for the presentation. And then from there, hope to be able to pivot to just being able to answer any questions that we are seeing being submitted through the chat box. Now, one of the things that came up during the presentation last week were questions relating to Senate Enrolled Act 410 from last year. This presentation isn't going to cover that specific topic, but we internally, the department is having conversations to prepare the field reps so that they're comfortable answering any and all questions that a specific library may have about how 410 may impact them either this year or in future cycles. One of the things you're going to hear more than once this morning is there are certain things that are worthy of their own standalone presentations, where that's the only thing being discussed with the group that it will most likely impact. 410 is the first example of a presentation that the department is hoping to give sooner rather than later that will include all representatives from libraries, including representatives from counties or cities and towns who may find themselves in the position of adopting a budget for a library at some point in the future. Okay, so with that in mind, let's jump right in. We stand at the unofficial beginning of the budgeting season. But in order to really tell the story of the budgeting season, the first thing that I want to talk about is going to be the end game. And so this is sort of the agenda of the things we're going to cover today. Start off by reviewing last year's budget certification cycle. Switch to doing an overview of the budgeting calendar. Then we'll spend a pretty considerable amount of time talking about the resources that the department provides. We're going to end with talking about some of the budgeting best practices, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A session. So the budgeting cycle ends, or to start off with, let's talk about last year. The budgeting cycle officially ends with the release of this certified budget order. And while that's a very easy sentence to say, in another way of presenting that would be that the budgeting cycle culminates when we certify near 10,000 funds spread across 2,500 units around the state. For the last budgeting cycle, so in calendar 21, the total value of all budgets for all units was $21 billion. And so what that expresses is when we talk about all spending, that's what units in local governments have the authority to spend this year. Simultaneously, how are those budgets being funded? This year's budgets are going to be made up of $8.6 billion, billion with a B, $1 billion worth of new property taxes that are going to be paid by the various landowners in the state of Indiana. The budget certification comes with two distinct deadlines in statute. All counties at the beginning of the year have a December 31st budget certification date, or the department has until December 31st to certify your budgets. But there is something that can occur that will change that certification date from December 31st to January 15th. If any unit within the county either plans on filing a shortfall appeal or closes on the debt in December, the entire county certification date changes to January 15th. So those are the goals, or this gives us an idea of statewide what the department's going to be working on, how the budget cycle ends. Now, the deadline for budget certification, as many of you still remember, used to be February 15th. A couple years ago, it switched to this December 31st or January 15th timetable. As we have made the change, or as we've started to grow accustomed to this new normal as it relates to certification, the department is starting to get better at it. What we're looking at on the screen here are some of the sort of key metrics that we use for sort of evaluating ourselves and our march towards certification. Last year, on November 11th, 545 units received their 1782 notice. That's the notice where shows that the budget has been adopted. The department has done its review of everything that was submitted, identified the budgets, levies, and rates for each fund, and have presented that information back to the unit prior to certifying the budget order. So November 11th, almost a fifth of the units already had their 1782 for review. Now, we could have released the 1782s earlier. Internally, we're going to continue to maintain our existing procedure for not releasing 1782s before the end of while a unit would still have the ability to adopt a budget. So this year, we're going to still be aiming for right around that November 11th date, but hopefully we'll be able to exceed the number of 1782s going out in that time frame. December 18th was when we certified our first budget order. By the end of the calendar year, 52 counties already had the budget orders, and then all the way to January 15th, we were able to get the 92nd budget order out the door. So we are, as well, statute gives us two specific deadlines to hit. Know that each year, we're going to keep trying to make progress in getting information reviewed, compiled, and then returned back to the units. We're going to try to continue to certify as early as possible. The goal of the legislation that changed the deadlines was to put units in the position where they were starting the calendar year with the budget for the upcoming year. If we can continue to certify budgets in December, it makes it that much easier to complete the process, specifically before we really start to get into the holiday season. But even though we've hit the deadline, the departments can still look at ways that we would like to improve. And that what this slide really hopefully represents really frames the presentation we're going to be looking at. Successfully completed the process, but looking at ways that we can continue to improve both how we act or our performance during the official part of the budget season from July through December, and then through the unofficial part of the budget season from January to June, where we don't have specific deadlines, but we definitely have more time to discuss the budgeting season. And so when we look at ways that we'd like to improve internally, one of those areas is continue to promote the DLGF resources, whether that is through the budget calendar or whether that's through Gateway. I want to make sure you have an idea of the resources that are available to you, or the things that the department is putting together and sharing so that you are in the best possible position to really hit the budget season running. Number two is proactive preseason outreach. The department's always here when you have questions, and hopefully you've seen that whether you are emailing the commissioner or the director or your DLGF field representative. But this year we really wanted to actively seek you out, right? So instead of making you bring the questions to us, what we wanted to do was see if we can't come to you and find out if you have any questions for us. The not mandatory, not something we were requiring, but something that I challenged the field reps to do and then had them submitting biweekly reports of just to monitor their progress. You can see that over the last 6 months, we've been able to schedule 93 Teams meetings with library officials and 40 teleconferences. Now, the goal of those were really to just see if there were questions you had from the last budgeting season, anything that we can help you to provide or to prepare for. Again, not mandatory, but during this particular time of the year, we wanted to see if we can't spend more time sort of engaging you directly. The last one, and it really goes hand in hand with number two there, was an increased emphasis on recommended budget preseason activities. Again, we're still in the unofficial, we haven't officially started the budgeting season yet, but that doesn't mean there aren't things that we can do to review what had been done in the last season to better prepare for what's coming the upside, better prepare for what's going to occur in the upcoming season. If the agenda outlines the topics, this particular slide really frames what I hope to accomplish with the presentation this morning. So, speaking of the budgeting calendar, that's where I'd actually like to start in terms of that's actually where I'd like to start. And on the calendar itself, the department releases the calendar in January, or releases the preliminary budgeting calendar in January. What this is designed to do is outline, not specifically for libraries, but for all units, a number of the key dates that everyone should keep in mind during for the next 14 months. The calendar may be amended again after the end of the legislative cycle. If there are new things that we need to either be collecting or new deadlines that we need to be incorporating or changes in existing deadlines, we may amend the calendar. But as early as January, we're trying to get the word out of some of the dates that we need to make sure that some of the statutory dates that exist that we need to keep in mind for the upcoming cycle. I like the calendar that the department provides, but it is far from perfect. There are a couple weaknesses that we should discuss there's a couple weaknesses that we should discuss. The first one is the calendar that we're releasing is for everyone. So as you scroll through it, you're going to see references to counties or TIF districts or distributions that don't impact libraries. We know that going into it, we've tried to balance so that it contains useful information, although the useful information that we're including may not necessarily be a library unit. The other weakness that we should discuss before we start looking at the calendar itself is the format that the department uses for the calendar is that we reference key activities based on the statutory deadline that it needs to occur. Now, while it's important that we know the deadlines, that doesn't always present the amount of time it takes necessary to complete a given task. If you flip to the calendar and see something that is due on June 1st, but it takes you 30 days or 60 days or 90 days to compile that information, by the time you see the due date, you may not necessarily see how much time it's going to take to actually accomplish it. It's a difficult balancing act to incorporate the deadlines and to reference the amount of time that it takes. Just important that we know that the department is currently leaning toward presenting the statutory due date, but would recommend that anyone who's looking at the calendar who finds a due date that's applicable to them, use the calendar to figure out, okay, this is when it's due, so I need to make a note to start this at X date to give myself enough time to complete the process and then ultimately submit it prior to the due date. And then number three, and this one really goes hand in hand with that one, is that the calendar is not personalized. And so while we're referencing statutory due dates, while we're referencing submission dates, that doesn't necessarily incorporate days where the libraries may be closed, days where you may be on vacation, days where someone may be out of the office. And so while our calendar is good at a general sense, know that the department often encourages units to create a much more specific and personalized version of the calendar that incorporates both the time that it'll take to put together any of the reports that need to be submitted, and that reference any times where a library director, a member of their staff, or a member of their board may be out of the office and unable and won't be there on the statutory due date. We're going to revisit this topic a little bit later on as we look at the budget calendar, specifically as it relates to the budget advertising and adoption procedures. Okay, so those are the weaknesses, but it's still, I think, an important tool that we use during the course of the year just to stay organized. So transitioning to looking at the calendar more specifically, let's start with both an easy one and a very, very timely one. The dates on the screen all relate to a very specific event that occurs at the end of May. So all three are looking at the local income tax, or the LIT supplemental distribution. On May 1, that's when the budget agency is statutorily required to provide the Department of Local Government Finance with a listing of all counties that qualify for the supplemental LIT distribution. 2 weeks later, by May 14th, the department needs to take those county-wide totals and create county-specific distribution. So if Van Dorp County is going to receive a $1 million supplemental LIT distribution, it's the department that will calculate how much is going to go to the county and the townships and the cities and towns, the schools and the libraries and the special districts. On May 31 is the last day for the county auditor to distribute those funds to any of the qualifying units. And so May 1 is when the budget agency tells the department. On May 14th, the department is going to tell the units. Between May 14th and May 31st, the state auditor's office will send the money to the county auditor's office. And then by the end of the month, the county will make the distributions to the individual units. So there's very much a conga line of activity where both state and local government are working together to get the money from us to you. Now, so 5 years ago, there was a change in the local income tax statutes. If you've ever heard any references to terms like CAGIT or COIT, or just instead of LIT, you've heard the term LOIT, or local option income tax. There was a change about 5 years ago that really overhauled how we discuss LIT, how we discuss local income tax around the state. One of the other things that new legislation changed was lowering the threshold for qualifying for this supplemental distribution. In May of 19, prior to the legislative change, no county had ever received a supplemental LIT distribution. 5 years later, or 3 years later, we were up to almost half of the counties were receiving it. So in 2019, you got 47 counties who received a supplemental LIT distribution of 140 million. Last year, we were up to 69 counties who had received a distribution of 225 million. And then this year, we're up to 81 counties who received a total supplemental LIT distribution of $226 million. Okay. So we are not quite at all 92 counties receiving it, but there's definitely more counties receiving it in the past. Similar to the 410 reference I made earlier, the department is one of the presentations we are planning on in the not too distant future is a deep dive into local income tax, which will include an entire section that's dedicated to this supplemental LIT, how it's being calculated and how it's being distributed. What we're going to do for the next few slides is just cover it. We'll cover it briefly, but know that there's a longer presentation that we are working on developing to cover this in more in depth. Now, so what is the supplemental LIT distribution? Generally, when we think of LIT, we think of those monthly distributions. The department providing a distribution report that we're posting on our website, the county auditor at the beginning of each month sending 1/12 of the total of that report. That's generally what we think of when we think of LIT. The supplemental LIT is different. For the counties that are qualifying for the supplemental LIT distribution, what you're going to receive is a one-time lump sum distribution by on or before May 31st. Where that calculation comes from is based on what we're seeing on the slide here. And there's a lot of jargon on this slide. And so I really want to draw your attention to three specific pieces. The first one is the 15% threshold, and that's what we're going to see in that second line. The second one is the reference to the determination year, and the third one is the reference to the trust account balance year. So when we're talking about the supplemental LIT, we need to figure out who qualifies. Now, when we're talking about the trust account balance, we're talking about money that was collected as part of your, as the statute says, the December 31st that precedes the determination year by 2 years. And so in English, what we're looking at is money that was still in a county's, we'll call it their income tax bank account on December 31st of 2019. If that balance was 15% or greater than the determination year, in this case being 2021. So if your bank account had a balance of 15% of your 2021 distribution, that is how a county is ultimately going to qualify for this supplemental distribution. Now, the supplement is going to be equal to the part that exceeds the 15%. So if you are 16% over, or if the calculation shows you have 16%, you're going to get 1% of that difference. So doesn't clear that old trust account balance. It just takes that trust accounts balance back down to 15%. Now, that is the determination for which counties qualify. Once the budget agency has made that determination, they're going to turn that over to the department. And it's going to be the department that figures out how much is going to each unit. Now, since we are using that 2019 trust account balance, the department will also use the 2019 county configuration, including the allocation percents, when figuring out how much will go to each unit. Yeah, again, that's a lot of jargon. So let me see if I can try that in English. If you looked at your current year LIT report and it showed that you were getting 10% of the total distribution, and then you looked at your supplemental LIT report and saw that you were receiving 15% of the distribution, or that you were only receiving 5% of the supplement, that's because the supplement isn't based on your 2021 configuration. It's based on your 2019 configuration. And so if you were to compare the percentage of the total that you received of the supplement back to those 2019 figures, that's where you'll be able to see, all right, I'm receiving the money in the same percentage that I would have received it had the money been available for distribution all the way back in 2019. So the other thing that's important to mention when we're talking about the supplemental LIT distribution is that it's not a penalty, it's not a mistake, it's just a function of how the LIT is collected, reported, allocated, and distributed. The change in the language for the supplement meant that money that didn't get distributed back in 2019, there's a much more effective mechanism to get that money back down into the counties. Prior to the legislative change a couple of years ago, the threshold that counties had to meet was 50%, which was part of the reason why there was never a supplemental LIT distribution being done. By lowering that threshold to 15, I believe it's only a matter of time before all 92 counties are receiving a supplemental LIT distribution each May. Okay. If we started this off by talking about being in the unofficial budget season, the next two slides are really going to transition us from the unofficial start of the budget season to the official start of the budget season. On June 1, or there were even some field reps that had started scheduling them last week, the department's going to begin scheduling those optional summer budget workshops, and we're going to cover this a couple of times during the course of the presentation. June the 30th is an extremely important date for everybody, and that is when the budget agency is going to release the max levy growth quotient, or formerly it was the AVGQ. It was rebranded last year as the MLGQ. What that is going to do is give the growth factor for property tax levies, and we'll cover that more here in just a moment. And then on July 1, armed with the max levy growth quotient, the department's really going to begin working on a variety of statewide budgeting reports. And that's what we're seeing on this slide. While there are only 4 listed here, the department releases almost a dozen reports annually. What I picked out just a couple that we're going to highlight, and we're definitely going to spend some time looking at that last one, the library specific report that we post each year. But the first one on the list is with the max levy growth quotient, the department will, for every unit in the state, be able to identify the maximum amount of property taxes that they'll be allowed to levy during the upcoming year. So in this case, we're looking at new property tax dollars, the maximum amount of property tax dollars that a unit can expect during the course of the year. By July 15th, we will have that statewide report calculated and posted at the unit level. One of the things that's unique about this particular report, especially as it contrasts to the next 2 on the list, is that this represents a binding total. Where we look at some of the other reports that the department's going to be releasing, where we're calling them estimates, knowing that a unit can use the estimates that the department's providing, or an estimate that they can come up with at a local level. With the maximum property tax levy, or the maximum property tax levy during the course of the year, that's the number that we are going to hold units to during the budget adoption procedure. So if you adopt a levy that is higher than that maximum amount, the department will cut you back down to the highest amount available. The second report that we're going to release, or the second one I really wanted to highlight, relates to the non-property tax revenue sources, in this case, including the FIT or the FID, the CVED and the excise. Using a variety of sources, but especially the prior year distributions, the department will put together how much we think you're going to receive during the budgeting cycle for these 3 or for multiple non-property tax revenue sources. Now, we looked at annually, the state is levying about $8 billion worth of property taxes. The non-property tax revenue that goes into work in the budgets is closer to a $20 billion figure. And so for a handful of those, specifically the ones that are collected by the state and then distributed to local units, the department is able to use that historical information to put together estimates that you can incorporate into your budgeting cycle. Now, those are when we're talking about the non-property tax revenue, those are estimates. And so while the department will put a number into the world, and we'll show you exactly how we're trying to calculate those numbers. If you feel like you can come up with if you were able to calculate a number that you would prefer to use during the budgeting cycle, as it relates to non-property tax revenues, you absolutely have the authority to use another figure instead of the one that's provided by the department. Along those lines, one of the other numbers that we released in July is the circuit breaker estimate, or your property tax cap losses that we think that you'll incur in the upcoming budgeting cycle. By the middle of July, the department will be able to put together an estimate and post that online. Now, unlike the prior 2 estimates, the department will be posting in July the estimate that we put together for circuit breaker is at the unit level, and so it doesn't say your general fund. It doesn't say your general fund. It will just list the library and the amount of circuit breaker we think you're ultimately going to end up incurring. Now, similar to the non-property tax revenues, they are estimates, and while the department, I will be the first to admit that it's the most difficult calculation that we do all year. Not only largely because we're trying to put together the estimate before we know whether or not units, including the library or including any other unit that could contribute to the ultimate tax rate. We're putting together the estimates before we have your budgets. We don't know if a unit is planning on taking out debt or refinancing debt. We're also going to be putting out those estimates before the assessed values are available. If the AV goes up, maybe the circuit breaker losses will go down. If the AV goes down, maybe the circuit breaker losses are going to go up. We're statutorily required to put out an estimate early in the process, but want to make sure that I sort of state in no uncertain terms, if you see the department's estimate and feel like you can locally later than July 15th, as you were working on your budget, come up with a more accurate figure, by all means, all units have the authority to use the estimate that they're most comfortable with. And the last report that we're going to take a look at, and we'll actually take a look at what the actual format on this particular report is the department puts out a report showing the maximum budget that can be adopted by the library board. And we're going to introduce it on the calendar, but we'll take a look at that here in just a pair of slides. Now, when I said before that this was a 4-hour presentation, it's because I'm going to reference some of the other presentations that the department has done that cover in more detail specific topics that we're not going to do a deep dive into this morning. One of those is a presentation that we did last year that was designed to go report by report, format by format, to examine some of these July estimates. Now, there's a lot that goes into them. There's a lot of the calculations. And so this presentation, or the presentation that's linked on the screen, was designed to take the time to go through each one of these calculations to show you how the department is doing it, where we're getting our numbers. In the case of the max levy report, to show you how we come up with that calculation, how we use your maximum levy from the prior year and not your certified levy from the prior year. I want to go line by line through each one of those. It is a 59 slide presentation, so it's a long one. But as we get close to releasing those reports during the upcoming year, using this presentation using the presentation that's linked here as a guide to do a sort of a deep dive into what's going into those reports, or doing a deep dive into what goes into the reports, could be an important tool. Like I said, the one report that I wanted to take a look at, and this is the advantage to creating a presentation that has a specific audience in mind, is that we can do an even deeper dive into the format, reason, rationale why the department releases some of the reports that we put out in July. Or we wouldn't cover this as we are looking at if we were presenting to counties, but if we're going to present to libraries, we can sort of customize our presentation so that it is as beneficial to the attendees as possible. Now, it's important to make a distinction between budget and levy. Your budget, or your appropriation, is your spending authority. Your levy is the amount of property taxes that you plan on collecting during the course of the year. With libraries, there is specific legislation that limits the maximum budget that a library board can adopt during the budgeting season. That's a lot. There's a lot to unpack, or there's a few sort of terms that are doing some heavy lifting in there. This doesn't control the levy. The levy that's being advertised and adopted is going to be controlled by the max levy statute. That number can be adopted at any amount that the library chooses to, up to the maximum. This control exists in the spending authority, or exists on the budget side, not the levy side. Additionally, I don't want to give the impression that a library can't increase its budget. The purpose of this particular report, and the purpose of covering this, is determining who is available to adopt a budget. If the budget, compared to the prior year, grows by more than the max levy growth quotient, then the library board wouldn't have the authority to adopt it. That authority would then escalate to the fiscal body, would be responsible for adopting the budget. If the library, compared to the prior year, is less than the max levy growth quotient, or if it grows by less than the max levy growth quotient is, then the library board would maintain its authority to be able to adopt a budget. The report that the department puts out in July identifies what that budgetary amount is, using the prior year certified budget, using the max levy growth quotient, what the department is going to provide each library is that threshold that identifies at what point the library board is adopting the budget versus the library's fiscal body is adopting the budget. And so by July 15th, you'll have this report will be posted on our website, both restating the certified budget and presenting the max levy growth quotient, and for all parties being able to identify those numbers and those thresholds as specifically as possible. Okay. But the official start of the budget season really starts on July 19th with the beginning of the DLGF budget workshops. Now, last month, do I get to say last month? It was 2 weeks ago. But in May, the department did a webinar on how to prepare for, how to participate in, and to cover a number of the steps that are required after a DLGF workshop. The slides and a recorded version of the presentation itself are available on the department's website, and that's what we're going to see linked here. Both the slides and the audio version, if you didn't have an opportunity to attend on the day of. While the department hopes that the slides speak for themselves, if you wanted the narrated version to go through each one of the slides recorded from one of the webinars, that information is available. That presentation, the morning went 65 minutes, the afternoon went the full 70. And so we're not going to cover everything that we did. We're not going to cover everything that was covered in that presentation. That information is available for a reason. But there are a couple slides that I want to pull out of that longer presentation so that we can cover them this morning. As a quick overview, when we're talking about these workshops, we're talking about as a voluntary one-on-one meeting with your DLGF field representative. And by one-on-one, that doesn't mean more than one person from the library can attend, but it means that it won't be a group setting like this. Each time slot, the field rep will be meeting with any number of representatives from the library, including your financial advisor if you currently use one. What we want to do is make sure that everybody who's going to be working on the budget gets a chance to sort of participate in the workshop if they choose to. They are absolutely voluntary. You got a good handle on these on the specifics going into budgeting. If you don't need assistance, then the workshops aren't mandatory, but they are useful if you'd like to attend. The workshops are also not one size fits all. And so while many units come to the workshops for assistance with filling out a number of their forms and receiving an upload of some of their forms into Gateway as a start of the budgeting cycle, there are other units around the state that just attend to find out if there are any legislative updates that they need to be aware of before they start the budgeting cycle, or to follow up to see if there had been any DLGF procedural changes that they need to be aware of before the beginning of the budgeting season. So know that the workshops can be customized to what your needs are, whether that is just a short conversation with your field rep before you get started, or whether that is assistance in reviewing, completing, and uploading some of the information into Gateway. Now, either way, whether they be the shorter version or the longer version, we are capping them at 45 minutes. Now, as a presenter, I can tell you that 45 minutes sometimes goes by much quicker than we mean for it to. But knowing that annually the department does about 2,000 of these workshops between July 19th and August 31st, it's important that we are able to give any unit that is requesting this workshop, we're able to get through all 2,000 workshops in that time period. So what's the significance of July 19th through August 31st? The goal here is to be available as early in the process as possible once the information is available. So we saw before that the max levy growth quotient isn't available until June 30th. If we were to meet before June 30th, there's a chance we wouldn't have your estimated maximum levies. We wouldn't have some of these non-property tax revenues. We wouldn't be able to present on the maximum budget that a library can adopt, that a library board can adopt. And so July 19th gives us about 2 weeks to take the information we need, generate any of the reports that we're going to need to generate, finalize any of the new legislation that is now in effect, train the staff up before we send them out the door. That third week of July is generally our target. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we don't want the workshops to go out too late, because once the workshops are completed, there are still a number of steps, including the advertising and adopting of the budgets, that we want to make sure that there's still time to complete. So that 45-day window, we're trying to get as many of these workshops completed as possible. One of the ways that we need to do that is by limiting the amount of time that we're able to sort of apply to any one unit. 45 minutes should be enough time to accomplish everything that we need to. What we'll look at on the next slide is how we make sure that we are able to accomplish everything. What we'll look at on the next slide is some of the required steps that we're asking units to complete in order to make those 45 minutes as effective as possible. The last bullet is the most important one on this specific slide. The workshops that we'll be doing this year, like last year, will be conducted virtually through Microsoft Teams. Using Zoom for a presentation, we're using Zoom for this presentation. The department used to present using WebEx, but we are making the transition to Teams as our primary tool. Now, the Teams give us a number of advantages. One is that each Teams meeting that we schedule also comes with a conference call number. So if you've got someone who is away from a computer, they can still engage with the department using the Teams format. Two is that it doesn't require anyone who's attending the workshop to have a camera. We can share our screen so that you can see what it is that we're referring to, or what it is that we're looking at, or where it is we're asking you to submit it or upload it. So even if you can't show us, even if we don't get a chance to see your smiling faces, know that having a camera isn't one of the requirements for participating in these virtual meetings. Last year, sort of on the fly, we were able to successfully conduct the workshops virtually. We're hoping to just expand upon that this year, and by sort of getting that the word out that we're meeting virtually, we're hoping that we'll have even more success in the upcoming cycle. So prior to attending a DLJF workshop, and each one of these bullets are covered in more depth on that webinar that I linked before, but there are just a handful of steps that represent sort of the minimum requirement we're asking of each unit that's going to attend a workshop. The first one on that list is preparation of the financial software or their ledger book. In this case, what we're looking for is year-to-date totals by fund of the expenses so far in the current year. We'll also be using those reports to identify the June 30th cash balance for each fund that we're ultimately going to certify a budget for. Now, what's the importance of that June 30th date? When we're talking about the budgets, we're talking about an 18-month cycle. The building block, or the sort of the cornerstone or the foundation of that budget, is the June 30th cash balance. While we'll be incorporating property taxes and non-property taxes and expenses and additional appropriations and encumbrances on top of that calculation, it's important that we build it from a foundation of knowing what that June 30th cash balance is. Any unit that's planning on attending a workshop absolutely needs to have that as a minimum needs to have that as a minimum so that we can build from it. Now, whether or not you're keeping your books by hand, we can take that information just on green bar paper, or whether it's a report that's coming out of your software system, we can use either one of them. But it's important that before that workshop starts, in that timetable between June 30th and the beginning of the workshop season in July 19th, Any unit that's planning on coming to a workshop takes the time to identify those two totals by fund, both the expenditures year to date and that June 30th cash balance by fund. Now, number 2 on this list isn't going to apply to everybody, but if last year you went through the official encumbrance process by fund, the department is interested in the list of any encumbrances. That is ultimately going to be important as we sort of build the foundation of your budget. If there are expenditures that rolled over from prior year, officially rolled over from the prior year, we are interested in having a list of those encumbrances. Now, the third one doesn't impact everyone and doesn't impact all libraries, but it's worth mentioning. If you are a library that has a debt fund, it's important that you are able to provide the department with an original lender-generated amortization schedule. Now, that one always comes across as a weird request. We know that any unit that is taking out debt is required to enter that amortization schedule or to sort of transcribe that amortization schedule into debt management. The request here for the original amortization schedule seems to sort of contradict the efforts that are made to enter that information into debt management. But the reason why we're asking for the original amortization schedule is to validate what was put into debt management. Say that for a 30-year mortgage with payments, with semi-annual payments, as you are entering in all of those numbers for all of those payments, you accidentally type in 1,000 into debt management instead of 10,000. What the department, if the only thing we have is debt management to go on, if there is a typo, we're going to give you what was manually entered. The original amortization schedule just gives us a tool that allows us to make sure that what was on the lender's schedule made it into debt management. So that is sort of part of the rationale why we're so interested in that original amortization schedule and not just pulling the information in the gateway. We will use both to make sure that we don't accidentally give you a $1,000 levy if you've got $10,000 worth of payments that you're going to be making. The next one on the list will only apply to a handful of libraries, but in this case, I'm actively asking you to look into the future. If you are planning on doing an additional appropriation during the course of the year, that is something that could impact the cash balance that we're using to certify your budget. So what we're requesting here is if you are considering doing an additional appropriation, bringing that information along with us. Now, telling the department you're planning on doing one does not mean you have to do one. It's just something else that we can keep in mind as we go through the certification process. Next one up does apply to everyone, and that is the complete Form 1 for each fund that you're going to be seeking a budget for. Now, when the department thinks about budget, we've got a pretty weird definition. We are looking at this intersection between what it was advertised and what was adopted, what you're planning on buying, and what you can afford. So when we talk about the budget, we will look at all four things. If we're looking at a list of all the things you're planning on buying, right? Just that key piece of what are my spending priorities for the upcoming budgeting cycle? That's the Form 1. And in a very true sense, the Form 1 represents your budget, or what many people think of when they think of the budget is just what we need to buy during the upcoming year. The Form 1 is one form that the department does not review at the detail level and can't assist you with the completion of during your budget workshop. It's not one that we can upload. So it's important that prior to the workshops, any unit that's going to attend it can state to us, here we've completed our Form 1. We've identified what our spending priorities are during the course of the year, and that information is available in Gateway. And so it's not just putting together an estimate of what those forms are, but actually getting the data in Gateway so that we can access it through there, or more importantly, we can access the total through Gateway is one of the prereqs that the department is asking for. Now, the Form 2 is a slightly different request. With the Form 2, we can help with getting that information into Gateway. So instead of requesting that you complete the Form 2 in Gateway, what we're asking you to do is to identify or to begin to compile all sources of your non-property tax revenue that you're going to use to fund your budgets. Forgive me for using the easy example, but if there are fines, if there are library fines that you're going to incorporate into your budget, what amount do you estimate that you're ultimately going to collect over the next 6 months and then the 12 months to follow? The department is interested in having those totals, but is not asking you to enter that information into Gateway prior to the workshops. We're just looking for the total. So we're looking for a listing of the ones that you're going to be incorporating in the budget, but you don't have, but we're not requiring that information to go into Gateway. The last one, and we're going to touch on this one both on this slide and on the next one, is estimated dates for your public hearing and for your adoption meeting. And the dates that you are providing us aren't written in stone. We're not validating those in terms of saying you can't have meetings on those dates. But by bringing those estimated budget hearing and adoption meeting dates, we can review them to make sure they're consistent with statute. And I'm going to go into that in more depth onto the next slide. So what we're looking at here are sort of the minimum standards that we're asking any unit that's going to participate in workshops to complete before they meet us for a workshop. The webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago looks at these in more depth, but if you've got any questions about how to put this information together, where you can look for it, or what was put together maybe last year by your predecessor, would encourage you to begin conversations with your DLGF field rep to look deeper into any of these particular bullets. Okay. So that time period from July 1 to July 19th is a very stressful time for the department. There's a lot of information that needs to be put together, and we've got a very short timetable to put together statewide reports. But I would trade that 6 days of the week and twice on Sunday for would trade that for what proves to be the most uncomfortable conversations that I have at work each year. What we're looking at on this slide are the 3 deadlines relating to the advertisement of the public hearing, the conducting a public hearing, and then conducting an adoption meeting. Statute is built in a way that we can't do those in one day. Right? There is dedicated time periods that there's a dedicated amount of days that need to occur between the original advertisement for the public hearing and the adoption meeting. That means that if you were to start the process, if you were to post your Form 3 or your notice to taxpayers on October 13th, you will not have 10 days. 10 days can't go by and then have your public hearing, and then another 10 days can't go by before you have your adoption meeting. On October 13th, I'm going to get a number of very uncomfortable calls with people who will say, I forgot to submit my notice to taxpayers yesterday. How do I fix this? On October 13th, it will be too late to fix it. Even though it's showing that we have a November 1 deadline for adopting the budget, you can't complete the process if you start it after October 12th. The same is true with the public hearing. If you don't have the public hearing by October 22nd, you can't have 10 days can't go by before you have your adoption meeting. Yeah, every year there is a super uncomfortable conversation I'll ultimately end up having because a computer system went down, or someone forgot to press the button, or there was a new person who was involved in the process, or in the case of the public hearing or the adoption meeting, someone couldn't attend the meeting or it needed to be rescheduled at the last minute. These 3 dates should always be sort of presented with one another, because if you miss one, the other two can't be made. So if you printed off the slides in advance, if you are sitting in front of a computer that has a calendar on it, if you have got a Post-it note handy, or worst case scenario, if you have to write it on the back of your hand, it's important that as we consider what's going to be happening, as we consider the end of the budgeting cycle, these are the 3 most important dates that you can keep in mind. Like we talked about before, the budget calendar is designed to be presented with the last date, the statutory due date. But If you need to get your information into Gateway, if you need to have the meetings, if you need to prepare the info, if you need to enter the information into Gateway, it's important to note, especially with the October 12th date, that you should definitely give yourself enough time, or that it's important that you give yourself enough time to prepare everything that you need to in order to be able to submit by October 12th. Not to put too fine a point on it, it's important that on our calendar we are able to present the statutory due date, and there is nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with using the 3 dates on the screen. But when the department encourages a unit to take action early, it's not because we aren't aware of the statutory due dates and we don't want to give you all the time that the legislature has outlined for you to complete the process. It's that we want to make sure that in case anything were to go wrong, you have enough time to correct it. You have enough time to fix it. You have enough time to restart the part of the process that will allow you to still have a successful adoption by November 1st. Doubling down on what we talked about on the earlier slide, by bringing your estimated public hearing and adoption meeting dates to your budget workshop, it gives your DLGF field rep an opportunity to take a look at those dates just to make sure that they are consistent with the expectations. If you tell us that you're planning on adopting on November 5th, we will be able to point out that that will be after the due date. Even if you've gone through all the steps, it won't be a valid adoption. If you tell us at that workshop that you plan on having your adoption meeting, you plan on having your public hearing on October 1st and having your adoption meeting on October 2nd, we'll be able to say that there needs to be 10 days in between those two. We'll tell you that it needs to be 10 days between your public hearing and your adoption meeting. Okay. When we're talking about that at workshops, it's not that those dates can't change. It's that we're going to use those dates to do a preliminary evaluation to make sure they're consistent with the statutory due dates and the amount of time that's required to be between those particular meetings.
Hey, Fred, real quick, is that a typo that some people pointed out that it should be the 2022 budget calendar overview since it's for next year's budget?
Yeah. We can, the hard part of the budgeting cycle is, do we refer to the budget year or do we refer to the year that it's occurring? These are the due dates for so we're looking at October 12th of 2021 as it relates to the advertising and adoption of the 22 budget. So we can definitely look at that in more than one way. But Cindy, Don, does that help? So last date on the slide is November 8th, and that is the deadline for submitting all of your paperwork to the department through Gateway. And so we know that you've had if a unit were to take action on its if a unit were to take action on November 1st, there's still, once they've had the adoption meeting, they'll still need to submit their forms to the department so that we can begin our review. Statute gives all units 5 business days to make that submission. This year, the deadline for submitting all your paperwork is November 8th. Now, Dan Jones used to talk about submission anxiety, right? Where the process has been completed successfully, all the paperwork has been finalized, but there was always this gap between when the paperwork was completed and then when the department ultimately ended up receiving it. So statutorily, there are 5 days to do it, but hopefully, if you were to finish this procedure, whether it be on November 1st or whether you have your adoption meeting on November 1st or you have your adoption meeting on October 1st, once the information is available, if you submit that to the department, this is how we are able to start pushing out 1782s earlier. Once we have everything we need, we can begin reviewing and working and checking those budgets as soon as possible. So one last thought as we relate to the budget calendar as best practices, and this sort of echoes back what we talked about at the beginning of, The calendar is going to express the last action date, but it is not going to have a place to put in local availability. Now, one of the things we encourage all units to do would be to take the calendar that we've started off with and then start to fill in the dates that they're actually planning on using. If you know that you've got board members, or if you know that you are going to be out of the office during the last action date, being able to create a customized and a sort of a library specific calendar so that you can still sort of navigate around those pitfalls. You can still meet all the submission deadlines. You can still have all the meetings required, but using our calendar or using the calendar that we're looking at to create one that's much more specific to the budgeting cycle that you're going to go through in the upcoming year. One of the other things that we sort of propose as a best practice, and this is one of the things that we just don't quite talk about enough, is one of the things that makes the budgeting cycle so difficult is the fact that we just don't do it very often. If you've heard me present, I'm sure you've heard me say that the things that you do on a daily basis, you'll have mastered by the end of the week. The things you do on a weekly basis, you'll have mastered by the end of the month, quarterly by the end of the year, and the things that you only do once a year, every time is going to feel like the first time. So one of the things that we encourage units to do is to begin, as we're looking at the calendars, we look at the unofficial start of the budgeting season and the official start of the budgeting season, all that, all those references, is beginning having those conversations locally about what your budgeting expectations are, or beginning to have those conversations with your library board about what their expectations are, how you plan on presenting the budget, starting to get into that sort of rhythm of here's what we're going to show and here's when we're going to take action. And we're not having the meeting now, but let's make sure that everybody's calendar is available on this meeting. While all meetings are important, there are some very specific things that we're going to need to be able to cover. I want to make sure that everybody understands what will be and what won't be, or what procedures we'll need to go through in order to have a successful adoption. As it relates to that second bullet, if there are questions that the department can begin to assist you in collecting answers for, or there's information that we can begin to sort of direct you toward, the sooner we can get started in collecting those answers about what we're going to release, or why we're going to release it, or where we're going to release it, the sooner we can start that process, the better. Now, we know that with the calendar, not all the information is available today, but having a sense of, yep, this is what the report is. This is the format that the report is going to be released in. This is the timetable that the report is going to be released. What we want to do is just make sure that we are sort of arming you with all the information you'll need to sort of share that information locally, so that you can have the smoothest possible budget season as possible. Okay. So let's transition there to, that gives us a good transition to start taking a look at the department's resources that are available to you, or will become available to you over the next few weeks. Now, as with most slides, it's very easy to present it this way. There are 4 specific areas that we're going to take a look at when we're talking about the department's resources. Now, all of these are important, but number one is number one for a reason. In 2019, I think I gave something like 26 presentations to libraries, cities and towns and counties and treasurers. And that's the role the director plays. But the most important resource that the department has available, and it's not close, are the DLGF field representatives, the Miranda Buseys and Ryan Burks, the Wade Hudsons and the George Heltons of the world. Collectively, they have more than 200 years of budgeting experience. Oftentimes they recall what your predecessor did, and that's if they don't remember your predecessor's predecessor. They are invaluable in terms of providing guidance during the course of the budgeting process. Now, in most regards, should be considered the primary point of contact for any questions you have about the budgeting process. The reports, the calcs, the due dates, they're the ones who are going to be working with you at the budget workshops. They're the ones who did the outreach during the first 6 months of the year to find out if you had any questions about last year's budgeting cycle, or the budgeting cycle that was coming up. They are a remarkable group. Now, there are two limitations that we should always talk about, and that is department's policy is that the field reps can't provide you legal advice and they can't provide you financial advice. And those are, ultimately, we want to make sure that the budgets you're adopting, the figures that you are using, the meetings that you're conducting all came from the local level. But if you've got questions about policies and procedures, if you've got questions about best practices and other resources available to you, where to find it, or what that fella at the webinar was talking about, your field rep is a fantastic point of contact and someone I would encourage you to work very closely with over the next 8 months. Now, since we're still in this unofficial start of the budgeting season, the field reps still have a considerable amount of time available to start having these conversations. Once we get into workshop season, and then immediately following workshop season is when we begin receiving the information we're going to need to start putting together budgets. There will be a line at the field rep's door, or a line to the field rep's voicemail. Would encourage anybody who is getting started with this process for the first time to make sure that they've got questions that we can answer, or that we can try to answer, or that we can try to direct you to. We still have a solid 45 days of sort of engagement where we can start to talk about what the workshop should look like, or what the information we're expecting to collect, or just providing you more details about what the budgeting process sort of entails. The field reps are a fantastic point of contact and a fantastic resource that we make available. Now, one of the other resources that we would definitely point to is the department's website. Whenever we're giving a presentation like this, we can sort of point to that our website is hopefully an important tool, sort of a beneficial tool for local government, but it also has a number of reports that are designed to sort of assist taxpayers in understanding the property tax cycle in the state of Indiana. And so for taxpayers, whether they're looking at definitions and timetables, or just a general overview of what goes into the budgeting cycle and the tax billing process, that information is available on the department's website. Now, but for local governments, we know that it's a much more specific relationship between you and between the information we're trying to provide you. And so whether those include the memos that we release this year, or memos that we've released in the past, the various forms that you'll be using during the budgeting process, or the templates, the presentations we're making available, we know that that's hopefully a resource that you're able to tap into to just assist you during the course of the process. For units, most of your time is going to be spent between two specific places, either the county's specific information, there's a link on the page, or the new place on our website where we're building, or where we're posting the various presentations that we are doing in this continuing education section. Earlier, we talked about a number of July estimates that we're going to be making available. When we talk about the county-specific information, not only is that where we're going to post the county-wide budgeting information by fund, but all of those July estimates will also be presented at the county level and posted under the county-specific information. And so if you are interested in whether or not your county received a supplemental LIT distribution, or you want to see how much your piece of the supplemental LIT distribution is, you can find that under county-specific information. Your traditional monthly LIT distribution is there, the max levy estimates, the circuit breaker actual reports, the estimated maximum levy, the non-property tax or the miscellaneous revenue reports. If we are posting a dollar amount, if we're posting a report that shows how much we think you're going to receive, county-specific information is where you're going to be able to find that info. Well, that page continues to grow. And so while we haven't started posting the information for the 2022 season just yet, if you wanted to get a sense of the information that's going to be out, if you want to get a sense of the reports that we're going to post, if you wanted to get a sense of the format that those reports are in, you will be able to find that 2020 and the 2019 information is still available through the county-specific info. Now, the continuing education section of our website is relatively new. We know that from a webinar standpoint, that's where you're going to enroll in the webinars, but more than just a place to sign up. We are starting to use the continuing education to develop, forgive me, a library of presentations that can be accessible. Earlier, we looked at a link to the how to prepare for the budget workshops presentation. What that links to is not only is it available through YouTube, but on the department's website, we can see that both when the presentation was done, the slides, the survey, the video recording of the presentation, all of that's going to be available. All that's going to be available here. We can see that the presentations incorporate, or the next few upcoming presentations, as a function of where we are and during the course of the year, are going to be focusing on the budgeting process, advertising adoptions, the how to prepare for workshops, even a deep dive into even a deep dive into Gateway, are all designed to give units more, or a presentation covering topics that are focused on budget. During the first third of the year and into the last third of the year, there will also be opportunities for the other half of the agency or the assessment group to present on their webinars and to get those posted here. So what we have is just an excerpt of the overall calendar, but know that we'll be doing webinars during the course of the year, and the information that we will be presenting on will be linked both in terms of both slides and the audio version of the presentations will be available. If I can draw everybody's attention to the June 16th presentation, that's when we're going to do a deep dive into we're going to do a legislative overview. So yeah, not specific to libraries, but if there were any statutory changes that are going to affect the budgeting process, we're going to go bill by bill through each one of those changes. One of the advantages that we have seen by transitioning our webinars through Teams is the timetable it takes for us to make the presentations available, and an increase in the number of people that we can have attend at the how to prepare for budget workshops, or the budget overview and workshop preparation. We had 1,100 people attend, 700 in the morning and 400 in the afternoon. So if you haven't signed up for the legislative overview, would encourage you. That is one of the most important presentations that we give each year. We know that even if whether this is your first, 5th, or 15th budgeting cycle, with the changes that happen each year, there's always some new wrinkle that we're going to be that will impact the steps that go into the budgeting. Now, if you aren't able to attend, the presentation will be available likely within 48 hours. And over the next 6 weeks, we'll be making sure that the DLGF field staff is as comfortable as they can be with any legislative updates, so that if you attend a budget, if you aren't able to attend the webinar, but you still have questions about legislative updates, you'll be able. Those are things that the field reps will be ready to discuss at your DLGF workshop. Now, one of the other areas I wanted to take a look at is Gateway itself. While we normally think of Gateway as a place to submit information, it should also be considered a resource that's available to you throughout the entire budgeting cycle. And there's 3 specific things we're going to take a look at as it relates to the Gateway: the user guides, the prior year information, and even the public side of Gateway. Now, like I said before, one of the things that makes the budgeting cycle so difficult is the fact that we only do it once per year. The user guides are designed to supplement any support that you get from your DLGF field rep. Slide by slide, step by step, with pictures identifying what to click, where to click, what to look for, sort of the visual cues that we've baked into Gateway, all exists within the user guides. And so there's a link on the page, but what we're looking at in that picture is, this is me pretending to log in, and at the top of the page is a link that'll take you directly to the user guides. And we've got 12.5 ranging from how to complete the Form 2 to how to review or how to go through the pre-budget survey, how to submit forms, how to upload forms. Because we only see this once a year, what we wanted to do is give you a way to sort of supplement what you're getting from your field rep, or to supplement what you're getting from emails being sent to support. while all of those resources are available to you, sometimes we just need to be able to see what button we need to review or to sort of remind ourselves of, yeah, I did this last year. Okay, now that I can see the pictures, I remember this. I click this, and then I work through that. I think the user guides are an extremely sort of important tool to help refresh our memories as we go through the budgeting cycle. Now, in addition to the in addition to the user guides that are going to show sort of working through the process, if you've got the ability to log into Gateway, one of the other things you'll have available to you are every form that has been submitted to Gateway in the past on the login screen from 2012 all the way through last year's budgeting cycle of 21. Every budget form, every ordinance, every resolution that was submitted to and through Gateway is available to you. As we start looking at, as you start to sort of transition back into the budgeting cycle, oftentimes the best resource available to you is just knowing what was done last year. From a Form 1 standpoint, you can take a look at what were the expenses, right? We have a general fund budget of $1 million. What did we think we were going to buy last year? Or if I'm considering my non-property tax revenues, I wonder which items we used last year or the year before that or the year before that. Each one of those forms is available through the login side of Gateway from 2012 through the last cycle. But if you don't have access to, if you don't have login access to Gateway, or you're interested in what another library is doing, or you're interested in what the other libraries in the next county are doing, the department makes the information submitted through Gateway available to the public. And so this is where the public side of Gateway, or where the department provides information to both taxpayers and local government. Even if you can't log into Gateway to bring up the Vandor Public Library, you still have access to their information through the public side of Gateway. So on that main page where we normally log in on the right, whether we use the report search option at the top or the report search by address or taxing unit sort of icon in the middle of the page, there's two different ways that we can access these public reports. The active budget forms, similar to the ones that you can access through the login side of Gateway, are available through the public side as well. Additionally, all the information for all the budgets, levies, and tax rates for all funds, for all units from 1984 through 2021 are also available on the public side. And so what you'll end up receiving, or what you can end up seeing, is a report that looks like this one. Now, the Allen County Public Library is near and dear to my heart. This is the library system that taught me how to read so many years ago. We can see that in 1984, they had a general fund and a debt service fund with a tax rate of 29 cents and a debt service rate of 2 cents. Now, one of the drawbacks on this particular report is it's based on the different laws and statutes and rules that were in place at the time. The rules now are a little bit different than the rules were back then. But if you were looking at trying to present a picture of historically, what are we advertising and adopting from our budgets? What are we bringing in from a property tax standpoint? What is our tax rate has been from 84 to the current for every unit in the state, including yours? You've got access to the information that the department ultimately certified during that time period. And so I don't know that I've ever seen a budget order from 1984, but I can definitely, the public side of Gateway can be used to bring in those budget levies and rates for historical purposes. But if the budget levies and rates aren't what you're looking at, but are interested in what a unit's debt profile is, or what your debt profile is, the public side of Gateway also makes that information available. And so in this particular case, selecting the county and the unit type and the specific library and the debt status, whether it be outstanding, retired, or just all debt that they've ever taken out. We can differentiate debt between, we can use the debt type to differentiate between bonds and leases. We can differentiate between the various debts using the sources of the repayment, whether it be property taxes or income taxes. we can ultimately drill ourselves down to a specific debt and take a look at the information that was submitted through debt management, the manually entered amortization schedules, the listing of the dates for the advertising, the adoption, all the information in debt management for all debts submitted through debt management is available through the public side gateway. The last one, and I'm certain the State Board of Accounts is, at some point, State Board of Accounts will present on this information, but since Gateway includes both the LGF, includes submissions to both the LGF and State Board of Accounts, information about your core financial reports or your annual financial reports are also available through the public side of Gateway as well. Okay. So when we're talking about resources, there are a lot of things that are available to us. One of the things that we have time to start looking at is just like we started this presentation with, looking at what happened last year, what we went through last year, whether it's the login side or whether it's the public side of Gateway. You've got access to that information. You have direct access to that, to those values, to that information. So this ultimately brings us to the last section that we're going to cover before the Q&A, and that's just reviewing some of the best practices for this particular part of the year. There's a different type of best practices that we could start to take a look at as we get further along in the budgeting process. But when we're talking about the preseason, what we're looking at is a timetable that exists between, say, January 15th, when the budgets are certified, and July 19th, when the workshop season starts. While we consider budget certification to occur during the second part of the year, reviewing, reconciling, sort of interacting with the budget really does occur. It is a year-round section. The more we keep an eye on that during the budgeting season, during the preseason, the less surprises we're likely to run into during the official advertising and adopting procedures in October and November. When we're talking about best practices, and this is by attending the presentations like this one, by attending the webinars, by engaging with your field reps, by engaging with the state library and your associations, you're already accomplishing the first one about planning ahead, identifying both your internal and external budgeting resources. So external would include the department, would include the state library, but internally, who do you work with? Are there members of your board that participate in the budgeting cycle? Are there members of your staff that are participating in the budgeting cycle? Do you use a financial advisor? Outside of the state government, outside of your office, like specifically, who do you ask your questions to? Where do you find your information that you're ultimately going to be putting together for the purposes of the upcoming budgeting cycle? Number two, as it relates to planning ahead, we've covered a couple of times, and that is figuring out what your calendar is for the upcoming cycle. When will you begin to complete your forms or to compile the information in your form? When will you be attending a DLGF workshop? When will you be submitting your information? When will you be having your meetings? Starting to build a calendar to stay organized during the last 6 months of the year is extremely important. Oh, the third one's a little bit more challenging. Like the department did in January and February, of identifying, acknowledging that we had a difficult but successful budgeting season, but still trying to figure out, where do we put our resources? What would we have done differently, knowing at the end, if we knew at the beginning what we knew at the end, what will we have done differently? How do you evaluate last year's processes? Figure out what needs to be changed and what needs to be the same, what needs to be strengthened or documented. How do we figure out what we would do differently, while acknowledging that we didn't do anything wrong, but we're just looking at ways of taking some of the pressure off of a very stressful part of the calendar. Now, the last one I'm going to take onto a bit of a tangent, and we'll take a look at that in the next couple of slides here, is we build the budget using estimates. As the calendar progresses, we can start replacing those estimates with actual figures. Those actual figures may tell a very different tale. So how do we reconcile, or when do we reconcile, what we estimated to occur versus what actually did occur? And while we can look at that from a budgeting standpoint, a non-property tax revenue standpoint, I think the best place to sort of illustrate the importance of reviewing estimates to actuals really manifests as we talk about the circuit breakers. So circuit breakers are a challenging topic. We'll see that there's a reference to the full presentation that the department gave discussing what circuit breakers or property tax caps are, where they come from, and their importance as it relates to budgeting. We talked about how the department releases its first round of circuit breaker estimates in July. So that's what we're looking at the sort of bottom part of this slide. In July of 2020, so 11 months ago, the department estimated what we thought the circuit breaker impact for each unit would be. And in November, during the final stages of your budget adoption, whether you use the department's estimates or you use your own estimates, both are perfectly fine. In November of 2020, for each fund, there was a circuit breaker amount estimated. In April of 21, so 2 months ago, the actual circuit breakers were available based on what was actually on the tax bills. And so when we're talking about circuit breaker, we see it appear 3 separate times during the course of the year. But by the time the actual numbers are available, you're 4 months into your budgeting cycle. But the difference between what was used as the estimate, whether it was the department's or whether it was your own, and what the actual amount of loss that occurs could have a significant impact on your spending priorities or your ability to fund your budget for the second half of the year. So this is that link to that presentation. If you've heard the term property tax cap or circuit breaker and you just are interested in learning more about it, 60-minute presentation that goes down to the tax bill level and works its way all the way up to the amount of loss that a unit will ultimately end up sort of recognizing during the course of the budgeting cycle. We're not going to cover that full presentation, but if you've got more questions here, this is the link on the page is a great place to start. Now, I've got to do something that's a little bit dangerous here because these 3 libraries may have attended they may be in the audience or may have been in the audience on Thursday. What we're looking at here, what I'm presenting is what they estimated their total circuit breaker to be in 21. That third column represents what the actual circuit breaker was, and that last column shows the difference between what they estimate and what actually occurred. And the reason why these 3 libraries are listed here is their estimates are as close to perfect as they can be. Evansville, Vandenberg missed it by 0.001%, less than 1%. Washington Township Public Library estimated a number that's within $13 of what it actually came in at. And Logan's forecast was also right there. What they worked into their budget was almost exactly what occurred. And so this is extremely impressive. I can tell you from experience, it is a very difficult estimate for the department to come up with. Anyone who is able to come up with an effective estimate is doing well. But the reason why this is significant, or the reason why this is important, it means when we certified the budget, one of the things we took into account was the circuit breaker impact. If we estimated too low, right? So we thought the circuit breaker would be 100, but it actually came in at 1,000. There's a chance that a unit will find itself either spending down the cash it has, or worst case scenario, will not be able to afford the level of spending that we thought they were going to. The reverse is true also. If we thought the circuit breaker was going to be 1,000 and the circuit breaker was only $100, the department was in a position where there's a chance that we could have approved more spending than what we originally certified because there's more revenue than we thought would be there. Where this ties into is what we're looking at is during the course of the budgeting cycle, what did we use for our estimates and how do those estimates compare to what we actually know? Okay. So at a statewide level, now this is not just libraries, but at a statewide level, there were 100 units that their estimate was 50% less than what the actual circuit breaker was. And there were 260 3 units around the state where their estimate was 150% more than the actual. So but those are percentages. How does that look in terms of total dollars? Well, 133 units where the estimate was $250,000 more than the actual was. And probably the scariest group on this list, there were 42 units where their estimate was $250,000 less than the actual was. The question here is, which group do you fall into? Now, on the prior slide, I found 3 libraries that whose estimates are spot on. The question here is, when you compare what we worked into your budget to what we now know as the actual amount of loss, were you close? Were you too high? Were you too low? It's a difficult estimate to make, but in April, we now have the ability to reconcile what we worked into our budget versus what's going to happen, and then begin to make any changes that we need to, for spending priority. But that's also coupled with the idea that as we begin the next budgeting cycle, if we were too high, why were we too high? And should we be using a lower figure in the next cycle? If we were too low, why were we too low? And should we be using a higher number in the upcoming cycle? We're almost done here. The number 2, and this was important, that is just start that engagement with the department. When we did that proactive preseason outreach, those are not mandatory. If you're in a good position or if you were just busy during that particular timetable, we wanted to make sure that you knew that we were available, but we are working on your schedule. But there's a number of sort of interactions that you can have with the department, short of scheduling a time to either exchange email or to do a Teams meeting or to do a conference call. The commissioner's weekly memo or weekly email highlights some of the upcoming due dates and deadlines. It's a way that we share information. It's a way that we share information about the department's priorities. It is a very useful tool for figuring out what we are sort of escalating to the top of your, just to make sure what we're escalating to make sure that you are aware of. Now again, when we're putting those out, we're sending them to all units. So you'll mixed in with library specific information, you'll find school and county specific information. But you can consider that weekly memo as an opportunity that is the department reviewing its calendar and knowing, all right, here's some more of the due dates that are coming up, or here are some of the reports that are coming up, or here are some upcoming webinars that we'll be having in 2 weeks, in 1 week, in 3 days, just depending on where it is on the calendar. The memos that we're going to be releasing, which feels like we've been sending out a lot recently. The next big batch of memos that we're going to be releasing here in the next few weeks are going to focus on the legislation. And so where the webinar is going to focus on all legislative updates, the memos that we're going to release are going to try to get down to a more unit specific level. Last year, this is where we were releasing memos on 410, including the guidance about identifying your fiscal body and submitting that to the state library. It's those memos that we're releasing that sort of outline some of these changes, or this is where we're trying to provide our official guidance on any number of subjects. It's through our memo program. The presentations that we have looked at, or the presentations we've referenced through the continuing education or the county specific information that we took a look at, just getting an opportunity to review what we're going to be posting will just put you in a sort of the best possible position to know what will be available to you during the budgeting cycle. So engagement with the department is an extremely important sort of best practice, where whether you're reaching out through your field rep or whether you are keeping an eye on the guidance that the department is releasing, in order to prepare for the budgeting cycle, that's one of the things that we would sort of hold up as an extremely important best practice. But the third one, and this one really does, I really can't sort of stress this enough. The field reps asked me not only to include this slide, but this is one of the few instances where we've even put the the first bullet into color. The question asking is the important part. There are some questions where we will need to route you to State Board of Accounts. There's some questions where we will need to route you to the county attorney, or we'll need to route you to your county auditor. There are sometimes we'll say, well, that information will be available on X date. There will be some times where our response will be, that is a good question and one that is important, but we can't answer that without providing you legal or financial advice. But regardless of what the ultimate response from the department is, the more questions you ask, or the sooner you can ask those questions, the sooner we can get started on sort of whether it's envisioning new webinar topics that we need to cover, whether it is the question that you ask and becomes a very easy question in your particular case, but it's something that ends up on our radar for other libraries. Whether that is identifying places where our guidance is limited, the questions you ask, I mean, not only do we hope to provide you an answer so that you can keep moving along through the process, but we also use that information to figure out where we need to push our training, update our own guidance, update our own resources. They are as informative for us as they are for you. So once we get into workshop season, once we get into budgeting season, there are a number of due dates and deadlines and things that need to happen in very short order. In the next 45 days before we really start into workshop mode, you've got questions about the upcoming budgeting cycle, policies, procedures, the reports, the resources. Would encourage you to engage your field rep directly, see if they can help to sort of direct traffic to answer those questions or to set a timetable where we can answer those. The other things that the field reps can assist in is they can discuss what the 1782 represents, or how you can engage with the information that's presented in there. We can talk about the differences between what a unit advertises, what a unit adopts, what the department certifies. So if last year you advertised $1 million budget and you adopted a $500,000 budget, but DLGF certified a $250,000 budget, we can talk about what went into each one of those steps, why what we certified may not have matched what you adopted, why what you adopted doesn't match what you advertised. That was a fantastic time to sort of start those conversations with your field reps, just to hammer out any of those questions that you would have about the budgeting cycle. Yep. The other thing to do as we're talking about the field reps is, now this one, Don and Cindy, is definitely a typo. As we prepare for the upcoming budgeting cycle, if there are things that we just need to keep in mind, if there are notes that we can add to your file, just things to keep a look at, we can start to sort of collect that information in advance. We can start to keep an eye out for information that you want us to be aware of during the cycle, or just other things that you are aware of that are occurring, that if the department is aware of them too, we may be able to head off those questions that we're going to ask during that cycle. Relaying your unit's priorities, or relaying your library's priorities, and exploring different ways, exploring different options available to you to achieve them. That's definitely a role the department can play. And echoing back to something that we covered earlier of understanding how to prepare for those workshops. So in that 45-minute timetable, we can make the most of it. If you've got questions about that one, it's definitely a place where the field reps can really help to sort of guide you over the next 45 days. Okay, so that is everything that I have. In our last 21 minutes, we can open this up for questions, or we can put 21 minutes back onto your calendars for the day. But that is everything that I have. What we're looking at on the screen is just different ways to contact us, different ways to sort of get a hold of the department, and different ways to get a hold of the department. So, Haley, that's everything I have. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Maybe give them a couple more minutes to see if anyone would like to type anything.
You think they're going to let me off easy?
They might. I am not seeing anything.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll tell you what. So will the presentation is the starting point. If you got questions for me or questions for your field rep, we can definitely start to route those even after the presentation closes. But like I told the group on Thursday, presenting in an office with the door closed feels like I've been talking to my computer for the last 2 hours. So how about next year we make a deal that we do this in person next year?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So let's get through this budgeting cycle so that we can start hanging out again. All right. I really appreciate you guys attending, and thank you to the State Library for sort of facilitating these type of presentations. The webinars are important, but they often find themselves to be more generalized than these are. The goal of presentations like these, or through partnerships with the State Library, I feel like we can really get into much more specific presentations. And so the one we give next year, we will really try to drill down into what the libraries are interested in, what they're asking questions about, what you want to hear, not from a county-wide perspective, but just from a how libraries go through the process, what libraries see that may be different than the other units. Okay. All right. All right. I think I'm ready for lunch. So good luck with this afternoon's presentations, and good luck in the upcoming budgeting cycle.
Thank
you all.
you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, Fred. We will go ahead and take our break. It's about 11:11 here in India.